Alright, it's Mark Spence here, and we have something to talk about tonight. Different clays, and a new type of clay that we received. First is Nuplast, which is made in the UK. A lot of people from Great Britain like to use this kind of clay. And it's a pretty soft clay. You can get them in packs like this, which are multicolored, rainbow colors. We also have Craft Smart clay, and this is a kind of clay you can find in America, particularly in Michael's craft stores. Claytoon is also another clay which is in Michael's and Hobby Lobby and places like that, at least here in the Midwest. And this is probably the most common clay for animators in America, is Claytoon. You can see here I used Van Aken clay for this puppet, which I've dismantled already for creating a new puppet. And here he is. This is Ruble. So this is one of my most recent characters or puppets made with Van Aken clay, which is here. So this clay has been used to make California raisins, I think Gumby as well. They use this kind of clay. You can see over here, here's one of my raisin puppets which I created and reproduced. Basically in the same way as the originals, which I used the same armatures and everything. So this is the sort of traditional clay to use for clay characters in America, where you can see you can resculpt this character and shape him however you need to. Very, very common clay. So what is the problem with this clay? Now, this clay in particular, Van Aken, tends to, when you use it, if your hands are really warm and you start sculpting this clay, you'll notice one particular problem, which is, maybe you can see it here. The colors actually rub off on your fingers. I don't know if you can actually tell. It's a little bit hard to tell on this camera, but as you're using this clay, if you're particularly like this character here, we have blue and we have white. And it's actually an off-white, but when you're using this color here, you get it on your fingers, and it kind of gets, your fingers become dirty, and the colors sort of just cross over onto your fingers, and then cross over onto the white. And it's very difficult to keep things clean that way. So when you're animating these kind of characters, you're constantly cleaning your hands and using baby wipes. Or here I have a jar which has mineral oil in it and some paper towels, and I can literally just, wipe that stuff right off my fingers. So when you're sculpting, this is one of the techniques you can use to smooth the character with this kind of oil, or to clean your fingers. So that's very much an issue with Claytoon clay. Now, Nuplast clay, the issue with this clay is that it doesn't really readily melt. So for Ruble here, my puppet, you can see his face. Take a good look there, and then take a good look at this puppet here, and you'll see they have the same face, and that's because I melted the clay into a mold, and the shape of the clay went into the mold and created that form. Nuplast clay, you had to press it into the mold specifically. So you sort of heat it up in an oven to where it's a little bit soft. You heat your mold up, and you press that right into a silicone mold, which has a plaster casing around it, so the mold doesn't expand. So there's a lot of problems with Nuplast clay when you want to do productions with. Here's another puppet here. You can see a third Ruble puppet. So we have 1, 2, 3 puppets. So it's very common in a stop motion film where you're making clay characters to use a mold and make multiple castings. So Nuplast is kind of out of that. That doesn't give you that option easily without having to do a lot of sculpting after you've pressed your clay into a mold. Craft Smart clay is a newer clay. I think it's made in like Thailand or someplace like that. It's not a bad clay, but I find it's actually a little bit firm. The clay is hard to bend, like right now. It's a little bit cool in this garage, so, but it's a little bit hard to work with, believe it or not. It's not bad. It's not a bad clay, and once you heat it up, it forms nicely. You can sculpt it like Van Aken, but Van Aken is a little bit softer, which is why I kind of prefer it over Craftsmart. But Craftsmart, you know, it's not a bad clay. There's also Sargent Art clay, which we sell in our store, but it's along the same lines of Van Aken, so it's very similar. Not much difference to it. So we've covered all of those clays, which are Nuplast, Craftsmart, and Van Aken. So the latest clay, this here is Puppet Putty from Don Carlson, and right away when I saw this clay, I thought, huh, you know, it feels lightweight. It literally is, for the volume of clay you see here, it's a lot lighter than Claytoon, Craftsmart, and Nuplast. When you pick it up, it's like, whoa, you know, it's really airy. I guess that's a good word for it, airy. But it's also, you know, it's pretty firm. It seems firm at first. Then you take it out, and you realize it's actually, it's a great, well, what can you say, viscosity, or the feel of it is really nice. How can you explain it? It's not as hard as Craftsmart. Initially, it's more firm than Claytoon, but once you squish it a few times, it works really smooth. It's just super smooth. Compared to Nuplast, I would say Nuplast is a little bit softer. Probably, it's a bit stickier. I would say Nuplast is a stickier kind of clay. So that's one of the things that impressed me with this is, first off, like I said before, with Van Aken, it gets on your fingers. You gotta clean your fingers often. This, you can squish it. You can do whatever you want. I mean, literally, you can, here's a piece of white plastic. I can rub it on here, and it just does not, you know, it doesn't hardly, I mean, you can see a little bit there. See if my camera can see that. Maybe we can do a test. I'll rub this a few times on here. Alright. I think my camera's not wanting to focus here. Let me zoom in one more time. So you can see a little bit of color is bleeding off on this this cap here. And then we'll compare it to a piece of black from Van Aken here. Alright, so there's the difference. The red doesn't hardly rub off on there. So if you can kind of see it here, there's sort of like an oiliness to it, but you can see, although both have an oily sort of texture that's left on this white plastic here, the actual color of Van Aken clay rubbed off on there a lot more than the red Puppet Putty. So why is that good? So like I was saying before, when you're using separate colors like blue and white, and you're crossing the colors from here to there on your fingers, that's less likely to happen with Puppet Putty. Now the other thing that's great about it is, well, the weight I mentioned. So for example, if you're making a puppet like this, if this puppet has to, for example, stand on one leg, I mean, the lighter the puppet is, the less likely it is to tip over during animation. So just that fact alone is great, you know. Now, I don't know for sure, but the way this feels, the weight of this feels about the same as this, which is 4 ounces. All right, so that's a quarter of a pound right there. I would say it's pretty close. So I might be exaggerating a little bit. Maybe, you know, I don't have a scale right in front of me, but, you know, just the fact that something is almost half the weight is great for animation. So like these California Raisin characters, which, you know, they used a lot of clay there. I would say that's about almost a pound of clay. And all that stress is on these legs. So obviously, you know, the benefit there is the lighter the weight, the better it is in terms of clay. Now, Don had also mentioned that the shininess of this clay will be less in the final version of this clay. So he's still working on the formula just a little bit, but pretty much, you know, the shininess, if you're not into shiny clay, you know, that's not going to be really a problem. It's going to be more similar to probably Van Aken, I guess, when it's completed. But really, the shine is not so bad, really. Here's a comparison with Van Aken and Puppet Putty. A little bit shinier, you know, but not so bad. You know, you can sculpt it. It holds detail well. Now, I was going to do a test where I stuck it on an armature and bent the armature to see how well this clay held up to stress. So, for example, like this arm here, if I were to, on this puppet, zoom in. Okay, so if I move this arm enough times, you'll see what happens. Alright, so you can see a crack forms along here, hopefully. This is not actually sculpted in there. Sorry for my camera not cooperating. I'd like to get a close-up if possible. But you can see how the clay, as you bend it back and forth during animation, the clay tends to crack in joints like this. So underneath here you have a crack, and above here you have a crack. So you know, typically an animator will go in there and re-sculpt parts like that during animation. But Puppet Putty, what's so great about this is that it's almost got like an unlimited bendability. So, you know, you roll into a snake and you bend it back and forth over and over and over and over, and the stuff just it doesn't crack as readily as Van Aken does. It sort of just holds its shape and it flexes. Now you can break it, I'm sure. Let's actually find out what happens when we do break it. All right, so we're getting a little bit of breakage here, but you know, it's more of a tearing than, you know, from going back and forth, more than a cracking, which is different than Van Aken. So it behaves differently. It cracks less. You can stretch it to the breaking point, but it stretches more than any other clay I've ever used outside of Silly Putty. So that's really great. So anyway, this is Puppet Putty. I don't really have much more to say about it, other than I'm really excited that we're going to probably sell this in our store soon, and packs like this, which will have a label that says Puppet Putty on there. It's going to be nicer, but so there'd be like 4 colors per pack or something like that. It's kind of, he has a lot of ideas, and he hasn't really set his mind on any one particular thing, but Puppet Putty is great. I would suggest anybody that wants a clay for animation purposes, that this is probably the best clay I've ever, you know, used before, in terms of all the benefits and solving the problems of color bleeding, breaking because it bends so much more nicely, and weight. Okay, and as far as this clay melting, so does it melt? And the answer is yes, it does. And I'm going to show you here, we have a mug full of hot tea, and we're going to press it on this mug and see what happens. Alright, so as you can see, it does melt, and so it is not like new plast, which does not melt, so it allows you to pour it into molds, which is great. So anyway, that's this is my messy table right now. And thanks for listening about Puppet Putty.